Welcome to the Rise to the Challenge podcast. Joined today, he's a speaker, entrepreneur, founder of Follis Marketing Therapy and Big Idea Video. It's John Follis. How are you doing today, John?
Hey, Alex, I'm doing great.
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what did you like to do growing up?
I grew up in Connecticut, even though I spent most of my career in New York City. Growing up, I did normal kid stuff. I love sports. I was really into models, building models when I was a kid. I started out when I was about, 7 or 8 years old and made over 100 models. Where I lived was kind of in the country. So oftentimes I didn't have playmates to hang out with. So there was a lot of solo time that I had to figure out what to do. So again, maybe that's part of the creative aspect of my personality. I love the idea that I was building something or creating something. So I really, really got into model building and did that from maybe 7 or 8 until I was about 14, 15 years old. And then when I was 13, I started taking guitar lessons and really enjoyed the guitar and have been playing ever since. So those are some of the things I enjoyed as a kid.
I'm fascinated about the model project that you worked on. With doing those projects, did it kind of give you kind of the entrepreneurial, like where you're able to control what it looks like, what it is, and things like that?
Well, it wasn't a project. Your model kits. You go to a hobby store and you buy a kit and you build it. And when you finish it, you buy another one. It depends how serious you are and how meticulous you are about the detail work of building these things, then painting them and all that stuff. But I was a perfectionist, and I think what I liked about it was, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of creating something and building something. So I guess you can make an analogy to being an entrepreneur. I mean, that may be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
But I guess because I consider myself a creative person, that may be one reason why I enjoyed the idea of building and creating something.
Was there one model kit that was, looking back, your favorite? Something that like was impressive that you put together?
Some models were more ambitious than others. Some of them involved batteries and motors and things like that, and wires and things like that. Most of them were just plastic parts you glue together. But there were 2 or 3 of them that were more serious and involved, mechanics and electronics. So I guess, a couple of those. There was one battleship that I built where it actually sailed in a figure 8, if you got it in water, and things moved on it and stuff like that. So I guess that was one of my more ambitious models.
Was it tough, it being in the countryside where you're not around a lot of other people or your friends aren't near you? You might have to drive a distance to get there and things like that.
Well, it wasn't that far. Fortunately, a bicycle would connect me with my friends, but as I mentioned, because it wasn't convenient to connect with friends, that's one reason why a lot of the things I did growing up, which didn't just include building models, but playing with soldiers, a lot of solo stuff, being in the backyard with my toy soldiers, or taking a walk in the woods with my BB gun, or shooting baskets. We had a basket above our house, so that's thankfully my dad turned me on to sports early on. So if there's any downtime, I would just spend hours shooting baskets in my driveway, and that was fun. So those are some of the things I enjoyed.
Was basketball the go-to for you?
Basketball was go-to. We had a big front yard, and I loved playing football, and we had a pond across the street. So it was like a multi-sports location. And often what I did when I was a little bit older was as soon as I got home from school, I started recruiting my friends to come over, because to play basketball, you need at least 4 people or 3 other people beside yourself, or hockey or football. And I just love those team sports. So I would just get on the phone and start hustling and recruiting my buddies to come over. and they were the ones that had to schlep because they had to come, walk to my place, which took, in some cases, 15 minutes, walking over hills and valleys to get to where I was located. But I just loved organizing games of basketball and touch football and hockey. It was great having, we had actually 3 ponds within walking distance from where I lived. So I got into hockey pretty early on. I know you're a hockey fan.
Yes, especially with being in Missouri. Hockey, any kind of sports is definitely a go-to. Obviously, I'm wearing a baseball pullover
Right.
right now, but I love that even if those friends had to come over or make that long trip, was it enjoying for them even to have that experience, all the whole group together, just enjoy and have fun during those times?
Oh, yeah. To me, there was nothing more fun than having my buddies come over and organizing a 2-on-2 or a 3-on-3 touch football game or a hockey game or a basketball game. That was really, really my passion, but it wasn't easy to do because, like I said, where I lived, there were only one or two guys that were, I could consider in the neighborhood,
Hmm.
and the rest of them were on, over the hill and valley. So, I think back now, I don't think I fully appreciated back then the effort that it took these guys to come over, to connect with me, and I'm really grateful that they did.
As you're growing up, did you have anyone that motivated you, was an inspiration in your life?
Um, my dad was a very supportive, encouraging guy. And so I would have to say the short answer would probably be him because he got me into playing the guitar. He asked me what instrument I'd like to learn how to play, and I wasn't sure. And at the time, there was a lot of rock and roll music that was big, and growing up, that's what you listen to as a kid. So I mentioned guitar, and a week and a half later, he walked in the door with a used guitar and said, "You're starting lessons next Thursday." and he was always, he would always throw the baseball with me or shoot basketball with me. I mean, he was on the basketball team in high school, so he was always sports minded. And we were not far from New York City. We're about an hour and a half, well, maybe 2 hours away. So he would take me in to see Yankee games and things like that. I actually got to see I mean, I'm dating myself, but I actually got to see Muhammad Ali fight Joe Frazier, if you know who those
Oh,
guys are.
wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. I mean, to be at that event,
Yes.
was just amazing. I was 15 years old at the time. So, he was really cool about that. But, when if I wanted to do a lemonade stand or, anything entrepreneurial, he was an entrepreneur. He was in his own a family business. So, he was just a very supportive, encouraging guy. I was in the Cub Scouts and he was a den leader. So that
Oh.
just shows you an idea that he wasn't, unlike many fathers of people maybe that you've spoken to on this podcast, um, even though he worked a lot, he was in his own business and he would always work on Saturdays and come home late. So he may not have been around the way someone who worked 9 to 5 would have been, but when he was around, he was an active part of my life. And to sacrifice his free time to become a Cub Scout, a den leader, I thought was pretty impressive.
Was that something you took to heart where you saw the hustle that he wanted to do to be able to provide for the family, but he had to make those sacrifices to work those long hours, work on the weekends, and may not be there for certain events in your life?
I'm sure it did subconsciously. How could it not have?
Mhm.
Because he was my father and that was his lifestyle, and the conversations around the dinner table happened to be about his clients and his business dealings often. So I was exposed to that throughout my childhood, and that I'm sure that maybe on a more subconscious level had something to do with the direction that I ended up going in my career.
I can definitely relate to that. When I was younger, my dad was a paramedic. So there are hours that they're working 3 days in, 2 days off, those kind of long hours. And my dad had to make that big decision to stop doing that because he didn't want to risk not spending time with me. So he knew that he maybe had to change his course of what he needed to do as a career to make the sacrifices to spend more time with me. And I always viewed that as something admirable because life's short and you don't want to risk those times not being with loved ones or family members and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, not all fathers, for whatever reason, seem to enjoy their family and spending time with them. They'd rather be out drinking or gambling or whatever they want to do. But I always got the feeling from my dad that he enjoyed
Mhm.
being a family guy.
Sometimes we're asked, what's that dream job of ours? What was that dream job you were wanting to do when you were younger?
Didn't have one.
Okay.
I mean, uh, other than maybe wanting to be a Beatle.
I'm hoping it's the musician beetle, not the bug beetle.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Again, I date myself. Um, but the interpretation of that for those who may be younger would be to be a rock star.
Mhm.
But that I can't even say that, quite honestly. I mean, I loved rock and roll music. I loved learning how to play the guitar, but it wasn't like that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I really had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. And that carried on halfway through college.
Talk about that experience. What were you going for when you entered college?
Uh, to answer that question, to figure out, hopefully through the courses that I took at initially a decent liberal arts college, that something would speak to me,
Mhm.
by taking a variety of these classes that I had never been exposed to, like psychology or business or whatever. And nothing did. I knew what I was good at, and what I was good at was art, because my mom was an art teacher.
Okay.
So growing up at a very early age, we were kind of her students essentially. And so, we had an in-house art instructor, and I was really able to develop my artistic talent, but never really thought that would be a means toward a career.
Mhm.
I had no aspiration to be a painter or a illustrator or anything like that. I just happened to be really good at art. So at the liberal arts college that I was attending, I think they had one graphic design class that, of course, I took, and I was doing pretty well in it. And about halfway through that class, the instructor pulled me aside and said, "Listen, you are super talented. Do you know what you want to do when you grow up? What have you thought about a career?" And I told her that I really hadn't. She said, "Well, can I give you some advice?" She said, "You are super, super talented. And um, I don't know. I'm not saying what career you should pursue, but what I'm saying is that it should be something that allows you to develop your creative talents.
Mhm.
And this is probably not the school for you to be at. You should find a school that has more of a variety, whether it be advertising or marketing or filmmaking or writing or illustration or industrial design or fashion design or sports photography, or something that you could like explore your creative side." And thankfully that was great advice, because the school that she mentioned to me was Syracuse University, which happened to have many uh, top programs in the country, and many things. And you may be familiar, one of the best programs is sports broadcasting. I don't know
Mhm.
if you knew that. Marv Albert went there. Uh, I can't think. There's a few other guys right now that you would know that went there for the sportscasting, but they also had one of the top 10 advertising programs in the country. So that's what how I got into advertising. But even then, I wasn't sure. I was talking to someone who I thought was some kind of a guidance counselor, and he took my course card and filled it out with all advertising classes. And I said, well, wait a second, I don't, this is all advertising. I never took an advertising class in my life. I'm not sure that that's what I want to do. He said, listen, kid, if you're creative and you want to make money, you go into advertising. Now, take this card and, have that woman sign you up. And that's how I ended up going in that direction. But I have to say, the first class that I took, like an advertising 101, whatever it was called, I did not get along with the instructor at all. So it was kind of like the total opposite experience of the other instructor who pulled me aside and said I was really talented. What this instructor did was he also pulled me aside, but instead of saying I'm super talented, he said, basically, you suck at this.
Oh,
And he said, do not go into advertising.
oh my! I can't believe a teacher said that.
He didn't use the words "you suck." What he said to me was, "Listen, kid, there are 3 weeks to go in this course, and clearly you don't know what you're doing. So
Wow.
I'm gonna give you a choice. You can either try to stick it out for the last 3 weeks and take the grade that I'm going to give you, but right now your average is like a C minus or D plus, and you are not going to be happy with the grade that I'm going to give you. Or you can just drop the class and get an incomplete. That's a choice I'm going to give you." And to me, that wasn't really much of a choice because I am not a quitter. I've never been a quitter. And I never worked harder for a class in my life than I did for this class. And I just could not understand why my grades started out mediocre and went downhill from there to the point where I was, getting D's. I'd never gotten a D, close to a D, for anything related to art or design or creativity in my life. I even got A minuses when I was a kid in any art related class. So I didn't understand. All I knew was I thought the teacher was an asshole. And so when he gave me, in retrospect, I'm kind of grateful that he gave me that option because I didn't want to go back to my dad and tell him that I flunked my first advertising course, which was my major. So I ended up dropping it. And I said, can I think about it? He said, yeah, you got 24 hours. Let me know what you want to do tomorrow. As I walked out the door, he said, and one more thing, he said, do not go into advertising.
And now look at you.
And so, when I was invited to the White House to be honored for an advertising campaign that I did, that the NBA had sponsored and put $5 million worth of their media time behind. And it was so effective. It was a public service campaign for child abuse prevention. And that's the reason I was acknowledged at the White House, because it was so effective. I feel like I kind of felt vindicated.
I mean, it's so good that you kept with it and having that result of going to the White House and looking back at that experience where that teacher said you shouldn't get into that industry, and you've been able to kind of rise to the challenge and prove to yourself that you can do that.
And also, when a few of these, I know you
Oh
folks
yeah.
who are listening can't see what I'm doing, but I'm pointing to the mantle over my fireplace, which is filled with gold and silver awards. So, I won in my third year after starting my agency. I co-founded an agency in New York on Madison Avenue. And within 3 years, we were the second most award-winning agency in New York. And there's something like
Wow.
1,237 agencies in New York. And to be the second most award-winning agency, and I think they were, at the time, I think there were 5 of us, that were at my agency. Is quite an accomplishment.
Something that your story talks about is overcoming challenges, especially in the workforce. Talk about those experiences and how did you get to where you became an entrepreneur and started your own company?
Well, I think I sent you this when I initially contacted you, but you didn't mention it in the intro. My first years in advertising were very demoralizing, shall we say, because I got fired 4 times in the first 8 years in the business. And that's a lot. I mean, people in the advertising industry do get fired more often than most people. In fact, there's a saying in the ad business that if you haven't been fired at least once, you can't be any good.
Oh.
Um, that just speaks to the fact that when an agency can lose a major account, that
Mm.
bills a few $1,000,000 and they've got to cut staff to compensate for that. So it's not uncommon. And often it's not the fault of any of the people that get fired. But 4 times in 8 years is a lot.
Yeah.
And it was hard not to, after getting fired those third and fourth times, it was hard not to reflect back on the comment that college instructor made to me and think that maybe I did pick the wrong career. But I had enough success with some of the agencies I did not get fired from to really still believe that I had the talent to be successful. And I think that deep down belief in my talent and enabled me not to give up. Number one, but also I tend to be defiant. So I think that's probably a trait of most successful entrepreneurs is that when they get knocked down, that they have the ability to get back up and keep fighting,
Mhm.
and maybe even harder.
Yep.
And that's kind of I felt, because I didn't really feel like I ever did anything to deserve getting fired. 2 of the times I got fired happened when at agencies where the guy that brought me in and hired me left within a few weeks after bringing me in, which is not an automatic death sentence. But when the guy that hired you is no longer at the agency, it does
Mhm.
make you vulnerable, especially in a very highly political environment like that. If you're familiar with the TV show Survivor,
Yep.
it's kind of like that, where they have teams of people kind of actually working against each other, working on the same account to solve the same problem. And anything that any of the other people who are competing on the assignment can do to undermine their competition, they will do it. They will stab you in the back at the drop of a hat. And this is New York City, so this is hardball.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? This is the big city. This is the big time. Which is one reason why I was intimidated. I did not go to New York immediately after college. I am not a city guy, and I feared that I really wasn't ready to New York for New York. And I even when I moved there, I did have a concern that I would get my ass kicked, because there's no city in this country more aggressive than New York.
Mhm.
And my personality, even though I started out in Atlanta, I worked 3 years in Chicago. So I developed a bit of a thicker skin when you work in Chicago a few years, but still, it's not the same as working in the big time in New York. It's like really the big leagues. There, even from Chicago to New York is a big leap. So I always had this concern that I would just get my ass kicked, and I did. And it was just a matter of just not giving up and just continuing to figure out what I need to do to keep paying the rent.
There's a lot of industries that are big in New York. You have Broadway, fashion, sometimes real estate, business, and things like that.
Finance, yeah, finance.
Finance, where it's a cutthroat business. Do you feel as yourself in the ad space and advertisement that being in New York made you become a better advertisement kind of individual, where you got to see the ins and out of something bigger than if you went to a different state,
Of
where you
course,
talked about other areas, but New York being the mecca
of
of
course,
advertisement?
yeah, of course. It's just like if you're in the film industry,
You're going to go
you
to
know,
California.
you don't want to be working in Topeka.
Yeah, that's so true.
maybe, listen, there's a lot of other big cities that have a film industry presence,
Yep.
but it's not LA, it's not Hollywood. So, if you're in one of those industries where you want to be at the top of your game, you go to where the competition is the toughest, and you either sink or swim. So I again, like I said, I felt like I had to work my way up to it, but I didn't want to look back on my career, not having gone to New York and wondered what it would have been like
Hmm.
going to New York, and thinking back, gee, I wish I had the balls to go to New York. And again, I wasn't sure. I had no false assumptions that I could be a success in New York. I just wanted to see if I could, when I moved there, I just wanted to see if I could get a job. And that wasn't easy. I mean, I did pretty well in Chicago, and I said, my portfolio was looking pretty good. And I said, oh, I'll get a job, easy in New York. And, 7 months later, and, 53 interviews later, with no job offers, I started scratching my head saying, what do I got to do to get a job in this city?
I think a lot of people can relate to that in definitely the last few years where they go through, even my friends, they go through so many interviews and they don't get anything. And it's one of those where sometimes now it's you have to know someone or you have to outbeat the other people. Where I came from a sports management background or degree, and being in sports, you got to start at the very bottom. But I always viewed myself as someone more creative. I don't want to start at ticket sales because I feel like I could offer a lot more.
Right.
But when you go up into those different departments, if someone knows someone, well, you're definitely cut. Like you're not going to get in because that person's advice on that individual has better odds. So I kind of came up with the idea of going around, try to develop more skills, more ideas, maybe expand what I want to do. And I got into the lottery business, casinos, sports betting. Now I'm in more customer service base. And I think it's helped him become a better employee and a better individual because I didn't go straight to the bottom. I've worked my way up to where I'm at today.
Yeah. Well, after going on several dozen interviews and not getting any job offers, I started hearing a couple of the people tell me I need to improve my work. In my industry, you have a portfolio, you show your
Hmm.
work, you show your ads, and that's how you get hired as a creative person, art director or writer. And one guy said, listen, John, your work is okay, but if you want to get a job in this city, you got to be a couple notches above where you're at. So
Hmm.
you may not want to hear this, but you might consider taking some classes, even if they're night classes, at School of Visual Arts or Parsons or FIT or any of the top advertising schools in New York City. And that's not what I wanted to hear. I bet at that point I'd been in the business, I think 6 or 7 years, and thought I was done with taking college classes, but I wasn't getting any job offers. So this is a funny story. I when I started hearing that, my response was, okay, so what class should I take? What school should I go to, and whose class should I take at that school? And I got the name of a lot of the classes were taught by working professionals in advertising. These were top advertising people who were teaching at night. And I was told which class and which instructor I should take. I figured out how to contact him, and I said, I want to sign up for your class. And he said, great. Why don't you send over your portfolio so I could look at it? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, we don't take everyone.
What a class.
I said, what? He said, yeah, I want to take a look at your portfolio. Now that made it, in retrospect, I think that was kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
He was a partner in an ad agency, and I think he just wanted to. One of the reasons he taught, and one of the reasons why a lot of working professionals taught, is because that's how they could find talent.
Hmm.
And so he told me that the price of admission into his class was to have him approve my portfolio. So I really wasn't in a position to argue that. And I went up to his agency and met with him and showed him my portfolio. And the guy offered me a job. Never took his class.
Wow.
So it's kind of crazy the way things happen sometimes. I mean, it was a crappy job, but it was a job.
Yep. You mentioned one of the campaigns that you did, but is there another memorable campaign that you've worked on in your career?
Sure. The campaign that really enabled my partner and I to start our ad agency. So once again, I was the creative director. Both my skills are both writing and art direction. And my partner was an account executive who had a media background, but his expertise really was business development. He was an amazing business development guy, and he could sniff out new business like you wouldn't believe. So he and I met when we were both in our early 30s, and he was very impressed with my portfolio. He said to me, we met for a beer, and about 20 minutes into the conversation, after he looked at my work, he said, "I really think we could start an ad agency together." To which I replied, "What's your name again?" And so I agreed. Listen, at the time I was freelancing, so to have someone else acting as my agent, basically walking around town with my portfolio, trying to get not just agencies to hire us, but clients that had their own budgets, to me was kind of a cool concept. So I said, okay, well, I'll give you a copy of my portfolio, see what you can do, and if we get some business, and then we could talk about taking it to another level, and maybe starting an agency possibly. And so nothing really happened for the first 6 months. And then he said we had an opportunity to pitch an account that he said was a real long shot, but the account actually had some money to spend. They wanted to spend about close to $500,000 on a TV commercial. And I'm talking, this was 35 years ago. So that $500,000 now would be probably closer to $1 million. And he said there's, he said, I had a conversation with the president of the company, and I told him that we were the most creative agency in New York. I said, "You said that?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, aren't we?" And I said, "Absolutely." And they were based in New Jersey. And he said, he said, he wouldn't tell me exactly, but he did tell me there are several other agencies pitching the account. And when I'm talking other agencies, I mean, these were real advertising agencies. We were just two guys, who barely knew each other, working out of our apartment. So we weren't really an agency, but you're all on the even ground when you're presenting work. It really comes down to who presents the most compelling idea for a TV spot.
Yep.
So at that point, I felt like, despite the fact we were just a couple of guys, I really believed that no one's creative work was better than what I could come up with. And we pitched the work, and we got it. And it was a real kick-ass campaign. And it was so successful so quickly that his initial media buy was $350K. But after the first month, he saw sales going up so quickly. Sales increased 90% the first month that he ran the commercial, which is unbelievable. That he found another $500,000, another 500K. So it was actually more than his initial media buy. And he put that, and we make, how agencies make their money is a commission on the media. So when he just throws another $500,000 there, that's whatever 15% of $500,000 goes right in our pockets for planning and buying the media. So that was enough funding to enable us to pay rent on Madison Avenue and, get some tables and chairs and computers and stuff. And the account ended up being so successful. Not only did we get a lot of press, we were actually interviewed on CNBC live on their business channel, which was kind of a trip. When you have these robotic cameras and you're being interviewed live, it's kind of a freaky experience. And then it also became a Harvard business case study. So it was taught at the Harvard Business School because
Wow.
it was so successful. So that certainly was one of the most memorable campaigns.
Looking at your journey in the advertisement space, what has been the challenging part that has helped you grow as a person?
Hmm. I guess dealing with all the rejections, really. It's, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, that whole mantra thing, right?
Yep.
So it really, I think it really tested my confidence and my commitment as well, and listen, even when I co-founded this agency, which became very successful, um, my partner wasn't the most trustworthy fellow, shall we say. And even though we had a lot of success together, I realized very soon after meeting him that if we ever went into business together, it would probably not be a long-term experience. And yeah, I wish I didn't feel that way about him.
Mhm.
I just knew that his skills complemented mine a lot, and I knew that I hoped and believed that we would be very successful. And I hoped it would work out long term, but my gut was telling me that it probably wouldn't. And then I would get a lot out of the partnership, in a few years, and then eventually have to figure out what my next step would be. And that was difficult because in many ways that was the hardest thing I did, because the time I left the agency, we were still one of the top agencies in New York.
Mhm.
But he was breaching the contract, and I finally had to, he wouldn't want to, he didn't want to talk about it. I just tried to, as in a partnerly way, is that such a word? In a friendly way, uh, felt like I had to. There were some things that we needed to address that were current concerns of mine, and he didn't want to hear it. So unfortunately, he forced me to do something I really did not want to do, which was, sue him,
Oh,
basically, hire a lawyer and send them, a statement that says, this is our contract and you are not following the terms of our contract. We need to discuss this. And when I had a lawyer, when I said that to him with the help of a lawyer, then he had his lawyer, and that was 9 months of legal fees, which was really unfortunate because we really didn't need to spend, or shouldn't have had to, I should say, should not have had to have gone that far and spent $90,000 in
mhm.
legal fees. And this again was, I'm talking 30 years ago that we did this, so that $90,000 today would be 150K. That was out of our pockets. That, had he been willing to discuss it with me. But listen, stuff like this happens all the time. And when the New York Times business columnist asked me why I left, I just said, it's philosophical differences, and stuff like this happens all the time in partnerships. This is nothing new. But the challenging part at that point was going out on my own, because uh, I had to figure out how to get new business.
Mhm.
And I did a lot of things really well, but I certainly didn't consider myself an ace new business guy like my partner was. And so that started me on a whole different path of trying to figure out how to pay my rent in New York City. There was enough business that allowed me to go for maybe a year and a half, with some part of the buyout was splitting up some of the clients. So I did have enough business to last me for maybe a year on my own. But after that, the question was, do I can I continue as an entrepreneur, or do I have to like go back and actually take a job again?
Looking at your career so far, is there a campaign or a style that you haven't done that you hope to do in your future?
No,
You've done it all, would you say?
I can't. Once I had done it all, but when you say a campaign or a style, no. I mean, I had a very long career. You know, right? Listen, right now, just for the sake of your listeners, I'm one of the things I love doing is talking about entrepreneurship and overcoming challenges and anything that I could say that might encourage someone or maybe inspire anyone. I love doing that. So, me talking to you and answering these questions is kind of what the place I always hoped to get when I started my career, where would have the luxury of doing just the things that I consider fun
Mhm.
and maybe in some way actually giving back, you know. I always did a lot of public service work, so I always believed in the concept of public service and applying my skills and talents toward helping other people. So I don't know if I would call this exactly public service, but I love doing this stuff like this. But the point is that I don't really feel like there's anything that I didn't achieve or didn't accomplish. I think I probably worked on more styles of campaigns. I mean, I've sold everything from infant anal thermometers to God. So one of my clients for 14 years was a church, and in essence, it was like selling God. And
Mhm.
another freelance project was infant anal thermometers. So I mean, I think that runs the gamut when it comes to
Yeah.
products to sell.
Looking at the future, what do you hope to accomplish personally? We talked about your professional life, but personally, what do you want to accomplish?
Hmm, that's a great question. I think it. I've personally have a really successful partnership with my girlfriend. You know, I've um, during most of my career, I've been single and kind of put all my energy into my career, and maybe that's one of the things that enabled me to do a lot of the things because unlike many people, I didn't have. I mean, I was married briefly, but I didn't have a family to
Mhm.
take care of. So, um, and not I'm not saying that I want a family right now, but you know, one of the things that gives me a lot of that's that it really enriches my life is the partnership I have with my girlfriend of 12 years. And so that's very important to me that that continues to go well because I think it's great if you can find someone that you're compatible with and that you can kind of grow old with.
Yep.
Um, I think that's rare, and sometimes it takes a couple of tries to get that right. You know, maybe even more. Um, so I put value in that, but I love doing stuff that helps people and tries to make the world a better place. So even though I'm not active with my business, I've always made time to do volunteer work, give
Mhm.
back. And like I said, doing these podcasts to me, this is fun. I love speaking. I love talking about these things. I love inspiring people. So I'd love to continue doing this. I love, you know, there's so many people that are really struggling with with their career. And at the beginning of this interview, Alex, I mentioned to you that I wasn't sure that I had anything that was any, you know, special, especially compared to some of the other people that you've interviewed. And you said to me, well, there's so many people that are struggling with their careers and maybe they've been fired once or twice and are really kind of questioning themselves and the fact that not only did you get fired 4 times and still and you know and continue on in your industry, you had one of the top agencies in New York in a very competitive industry and probably the most competitive city in the country. And you've had all these honors. You've been honored at the White House, and I actually was honored at the United Nations as well for a similar child abuse prevention campaign. So you said to me, stories like that really are great inspirations to other people. And to me, that just, there's nothing better than to be able to inspire people with my own story.
100% agree. I think everyone has a unique story in how they rise to the challenge. And that's what makes what I do special, is because not what every guest is different. No one has had the same story, the same outline, the same look. Even with my story of being a diabetic, and I interview other diabetics, each one of us have a different way we got diagnosed and how we lived our lives. And that's what I love, is to learn about people's stories. And I think that's why I said about yours is people are going to be able to relate. They may not have done it similar, but they might have had the similar outcomes. And that leads me to my final question for you. For someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
So I thought you might ask me this question. So I did my due diligence and listened to a couple of your podcasts because I didn't want to be uh, um, dumbfounded with that question. When I was in high school, I don't know what it's like now, but when I was in high school, you had to, in your yearbook, you had to have your quote.
Yep.
Do they, I assume they still do that now. I don't
Yeah.
know. And my quote in high school was, "Where there's a will, there's a way." And a lot of my high school buddies were, were kidding me. Oh my God, where there's a will, there's a way. Give me a break. That is so fucking corny. But I have to say, I don't think there's anything truer, more true that I could share
Mhm.
with anyone, that if you are really determined, whatever it may be that your goal is, if you're determined to achieve it, I really do believe that it really just takes the desire to achieve it. And
Yep.
it may not be the way that you initially thought you would go, or the path that you initially thought you would take. It certainly wasn't for me. But if you don't give up and you really believe it's a worthy goal and you're committed to it, I don't think there's any better mantra than that.
Well, John, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we're excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Well, Alex, again, thanks for having me on the show. And I think it's a great theme for a podcast. I think hopefully you're inspiring and motivating a lot of people by continuing your podcast. So, continue doing it. Good luck with it.